Tell me about David Dawson. Grew up in Jamestown High School graduate, high school sports star.
Yeah.
How did you...
Not so sure about the last part.
Draw me through, after you graduated from Jamestown High School, give me a quick autobiography.
Well, I went away to college. I graduated from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. And I went into the Peace Corps. And I ended up in Africa, in one of the world's worst countries of the world, called Sierra Leone. And Sierra Leone, which is on the western coast and Horn of Africa, and it's where many of the slaves were taken when there was slavery here in America and in South America. Slaves were taken out of Africa for both continents, if you will. It was where the movie Blood Diamond was centered on, and it was a country in complete disarray, and it was an attempt by the Peace Corps to try and bring some stability over there, but it was not a fulfilling experience. It was very discouraging. So after the Peace Corps, I came back and went to work for a shirt sleeve relative of mine, who was Charlie Goodell. And I was on his congressional staffs previously, and I went on his senatorial campaign staff and worked on his campaign against Bill Buckley and Dick Ottinger. And we did not win. And we were ushered out of the United States Senate. And with that, I came back to Jamestown. And nobody would hire me back here either. So, you know, I ended up driving dry cleaner truck for Bert and Sid Anderson over at Anderson Cleaners. But I met Raleigh Kidder, introduced Raleigh to my sister, who he eventually married. Raleigh hired me for a job, or recommended me for a job up in Mayville, and I started working for Chautauqua Opportunities, running Job Corps programs for the county. And then I met Joe Gerasi, who was the county, soon to be the county executive. He was a supervisor at the time. And I developed a plan to create a development office in Chautauqua County. And he smiled at me and said, well, if you can get it funded, I'd be interested. So I did. I went out and got it funded, raised enough money to create the department. So we created a development office in Mayville, which included IDA, Industrial Development Agency, and included a manpower office, and included a grants writing arm that eventually ended up writing a lot of programs that still exist in Chautauqua County today. For example, the Office of the Aging. A guy named Sven Hamar and I sat one night and we wrote the whole Office for the Aging program for Chautauqua County in about 12 hours, including CARTS, Senior Nutrition Program, all the current offerings of the Department of for senior citizens came through a 12-hour session, and that's what I was doing for a long time until I took over IDA.
The IDA had been created prior to your time, and I don't know much about in the beginning what I think it was Joe Gerasi envisioned that.
Right.
Do you have much of a recollection as to what the reasoning behind creating this creature of New York State statute?
Well, John Lunsman, who was the county planner, would wear work clothes to work every day. When I say work clothes, I'm talking about dungarees and overalls, because he didn't feel that government in Chautauqua County was committed to job creation. And until they did, he would try and make his little personal statement. And so, in conversation with lots of different people, but certainly Joe Gerasi and others, it was determined that, you know, the state offered you this opportunity of creating an IDA. And so part and parcel with creating a development office overall Joe and others responded and did the necessary legal work to create an IDA here in Chautauqua County. And so it existed. We had a real short-term guy come in for a while because he had to come from the outside, because he must be an expert, he doesn't live here. And so he came from the Midwest somewhere, and he was here for a few months. And
Who's that?
boy,
Yeah, I've seen his name, but that's it.
yeah, I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
And he left right when the opportunity for Cummins was starting.
Right.
So,
How did you get involved?
well, having written the program that got the money to create the development office, the politicians in Mayville, who were all Democrats, didn't feel that I was a Democrat, and so they weren't going to hire me, except for Joe Girassi. Joe said, no, we're going to hire him. So Joe hired me, regardless of the fact that the politicians didn't want to hire me. Mm-hmm. And so I started out in the department, writing the grants like the Office for the Aging and various other things. And eventually, when this guy left, his name just popped into my head and popped out again. Joe turned to me and asked me to take over the IDA.
Who are the board members? Do you have record?
Oh, I mean, Tom Reed from Dunkirk Radiator was absolutely fabulous. I mean, we had a great board. Chuck Turcott.
These were all at the beginning, or did they come in over time?
These were charter members. Chuck Turcott, who was the Manufacturers Association director here in town. The heart and soul of the IDA was Paul Sandberg. He brought business knowledge, and he brought humor, and he brought a sense of purpose and mission that had nothing to do with politics and had everything to do with trying to fulfill the mission of what the IDAs were supposed to do. And that is assist business to either come here, stay here, grow here. And that was Paul's vision, and literally he became my mentor.
And Paul at the time was with Marie Midland Bank?
He was with Marie Midland Bank, yep. And I would go in to his office on schedule and sit at his feet, and literally he would say, here are the 5 things that you have to look at when you're looking at a business. You know, here are the ways that you have to understand what you're looking at if you're ever going to be successful in delivering anything for a business that wants to either come here or grow here. And so Sandberg was the best.
Tonight we're going to pause and reflect on the Tech Loan Fund, 40 years since its creation, though there's obviously a very interesting backstory to actually get to that creation of the fund, and nobody better than you to kind of help us understand the backstory.
Well, the backstory was that Dunkirk, New York, and Watervliet, New York, which is over near Albany, had a bar products division, which is a particular type of steel fabrication. They had mills in both Dunkirk and Watervliet, and Allegheny Ludlam, which was headquartered in Pittsburgh, decided it wanted to spin them off, and they couldn't really find anybody to buy them. Not making a lot of money, or seldom making money, and
This is in the early 70s.
it's in the early 70s.
Okay.
So it'd be 40 years ago, you know. Dr. Adolf Lena, who was the general manager of the bar products division, called me up and he said, anything you guys could do to help us? We're trying to put together a team to buy this company. And I said, oh, sure. Oh, sure. So we went over, and Bill Parment worked at the county at the time as well, and Bill was in some of the early meetings and discussions with me on what we might do, and we came up with a strategy because Allegheny Ludlam was willing to accept a certain amount of cash down, and ultimately the balance of the financing was the assumption of the unfunded liability on the pension plan. And that's where most of the cash came from, or most of the cumulative number came from, where Allegheny Ludlam said it's worth it now for us to walk away and sell it to these 35 guys who have put their money on the table to buy this business. So some of the working capital came from these 35 guys, headed up by Dr. Lena, who's now passed, he doesn't live anymore, and Jim Minton and other people who, some of which will be there tonight. We came up with a strategy using a very obscure federal fund run out of the United States Commerce Department called the Economic Development Administration. And it was regionally run out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania by a guy named Jack Corrigan. And Jack was an extraordinary guy. And he had just been given authority to loan or grant funds for distressed communities that had distressed businesses, that had a business plan that could stand the test of time as far as possibly existing after the fact if the federal government came in and provided some resource. So I put together a grant application, or a loan grant application, and Joe Girassi was county executive at the time, and I got him to sign off on it, and it was for $10 million. And we submitted that to EDA, went down and had our negotiations with them, with Jack Corrigan, and I was looking for a $5 million grant and a $5 million loan. And he said, no, it's going to have to be a $10 million grant. I said, okay. That's okay, Jack. That'd be fine. And so obviously there was a lot more paperwork to do, and there was a lot more discussions about the overall package. There had to be sign off by any number of people in Jack's organization, in the Commerce Department. It was the single largest grant at that time for a project of this kind in the United States. And so we were breaking new ground. And the other unique feature of it is that we got to keep the money, and we got to put it into a revolving loan fund as Altech paid it back. We got the grant, Altech got it as a loan. And Altech paid us back, and that money went into a fund which were then used to loan to other companies trying to do what their vision was as far as what they were trying to accomplish. And of course it's been used literally hundreds of times now over the years for any number of businesses in this county.
The administrator of that repaid funds was the New York Job Development Authority.
Right.
Do you remember much of the discussion as to who would actually administer that? Was that part of the grant agreement that they would be designated?
Originally, it was all going to come to Chautauqua County because we had done all the work, even though Waterville Lead over in Albany County was part of the process. And Jack called me right before the closing and said, we've been on discussions with the state of New York, and the state commissioner of commerce is a guy named John Daly, and we've decided that we're going to have to give the grant through the state of New York, not to Chautauqua County, because you're too small to get the largest grant we've ever given out. And they've designated the Job Development Authority as the repository of all the repayments and the loan authority for loans going forward. They're going to have to be approved locally, but then they're going to have to be approved by the state as well. So any reuse of the funds is going to have to go through a two-step process. What was I going to say? No?
Yeah, of course.
And that's how the process went.
I'm looking at the grant agreement here, which it talks about they offer it to the New York State Department of Commerce Trust Fund 226-01, and that was the beginning of it, the actual grant agreement. Yeah, 6/30/76. Once that got started, of course, it took a while before the funds to be accumulated from the repayment to actually kick into the efficacy portion of it. How did that work? So at some point, did the JDA administrator call you and by the way, who was in Albany? Was that the Albany Chamber of Commerce? What was their role?
It was the Albany County IDA.
Was it IDA?
Was their arm. Yeah, and I have no idea about anything that they did other than the fact that there were some people that misused the funds up in Albany County, and a couple people went to jail, which was unfortunate. And you find that happening once in a while when you get public funds involved.
So from our perspective, did you get a call someday and say, hey, we got enough money to consider loaning money? How did that process work?
Well, JDA became part of our delivery system out here. We got to know them intimately. We got to know the people. We got to know the systems. And we would not only use the LTEC fund, but we'd use some of JDA's own money, and we would, it became another tool in our kit when we were going about trying to put together a project. And as the funds accumulated, there became more and more opportunity to say we can do $100,000 here, we can do $50,000 there, as part of an overall package where each of these pieces of the financial puzzle would be put into place.
Your points of contact at the JDA, because I know that's, at some point I get engaged in that process where I was the successor to Jim Summer. At your encouragement, we thank you. But then I was working with folks, who were the principals in the JDA who you had a great relationship with?
Well, the principal guy was Bob Dormer, and Bob Dormer was one of the most extraordinary individuals that's ever worked for the state of New York. He, good old Irish Catholic from Queens, New York, and he had such a love for all areas of New York State, which got Bob in trouble once in a while because New York State does not have a lot of resources available to it to do economic development. And so when Bob got the opportunity of doing a project, he quite honestly didn't care whether or not it was in Jamestown or whether it was in Poughkeepsie. If he had a resource, he would try and make a deal because they didn't have a lot of toolkit opportunities. And so the LTEC program became problematic in that the state was supposed to use it in the 2 counties, and they used it in a number of counties, and helped a number of businesses, whether or not they were in Shenango County or Erie County, New York, or Niagara Falls, or wherever. It was a resource that they used to make a deal come together. All of which came out in the wash in an audit, and the state had to put money back into the LTEC fund and to recommit to utilizing those funds in the 2 counties that it was supposed to be used in. But it was done originally not out of any other motivation other than to help companies. There was no malice involved. There was no underhandedness involved. They were straightforward, above the table, saying, here's what we're doing. And at point X, the auditors said, no.
That really wasn't my recollection, David, but you can correct me, but there were sort of book entries where the state New York Job Development Authority would borrow money from the New York Job Development Authority's LTEC Trust Fund, and to get that money. It was sort of a book entry, and then it would be used on projects outside of the grant area, which was the Chautauqua and Albany County. Is that maybe I'm understating it, but is that principally what happened? I
think so. I think that's what happened. And again, if the state of New York was truly into economic development, it would have had resources like that to direct from the get-go. But it really has not been, at least back when I was running the show, it was problematic, to say the least, that New York State was a pro-business state. Bob Dormer was a pro-business job developer, and Bob Dormer was creative, and he was aggressive, And he wanted to do all he could for this company in Horseheads, New York, that he was sure was going to really mean the difference for Chemung County for the next 20 years. And so he would blink his eyes, and he would borrow funds, and he would move them over, and he would make the deal. And he got his wrist slapped for it and all that sort of stuff, but he walked out of New York State with his head held high.
I remember the report, the Kavanaugh and Cook report that came out in 1998. And my walk away from that, David, was when they reviewed the 108 loans, whatever it was at the time, there really just were very few problematic ones. And that most of them were incredibly successful. And to focus in on the successes, do you remember a little bit about some of the early successes of the use of the LTEC fund? Things that you can smile and say, yeah, we did that, or we saved that business, or whatever.
Well, I take a different perspective on all that. LTEC was a roll of the dice by itself. I mean, the corpus of the money comes out of LTEC, but LTEC was a roll of the dice. What economic development is creating a community that has momentum. You create a climate in which people say, I want to invest there. What we do as economic development people is provide resource A, resource B, resource C, but that's not where the rubber meets the road. That's not where the job gets done. If we are successful in putting together a package like the original LTEC loan program that was able to be a part of the package that bought the bar products division from Allegheny Ludlam Steel, thus LTEC Steel was created. I mean, we were done on day one. We as economic developers were done, unless they came back and said, we have other ideas and other things that we need you to help us with, which many companies did. The job gets done by the business people and the technicians at LTEC that are concerned about the quality of the product, that are concerned about the working conditions in the plant, that are concerned about the technology that they are using to be competitive. The blocking and the tackling that they have to do on Tuesday, and then a week from Tuesday and a month from Tuesday. Those are the people that made this thing happen. They make the business happen. What we get out of as economic developers is to say to them, the price that we are charging you to do the assistance that we are giving you is for you to talk to other business people and to say, work with the IDA, look at Chautauqua County, look at Dunkirk, look at Jamestown, because this is a group of people that you can work with to fulfill your own business dreams. Mm-hmm. But those business dreams are not fulfilled by anybody but the investors and the day-to-day people who block and tackle their way through their individual businesses. That's where business happens. A community benefits when more and more of those happen, where they feel that they have a partner who understands how to put together a resource package that makes the original setup or growth package happen. But we know that government doesn't create jobs. Government becomes either a facilitator or an obstacle. We tried to become a facilitator in making business happen. We tried to celebrate those people who are willing to risk their lives, risk their fortunes, risk their families' fortunes, and to say, you know, I'm going to build a mattress factory down on Blackstone Avenue in Jamestown, Jim Pullen, and today he's got multiple locations. He's got a very successful business, and we were a big part of helping him do that. But did we run his business? Did we make his business successful? Heck no. The Pullen family made that whole business successful. It wasn't us. You know, the same with Hope's Windows. When Roblin Industries got into trouble, which is another story that we were intimately involved with, and Frank Farrell and the Farrell family wanted to try and buy that business. We put together the package using all sorts of resources, including LTEC. And we were able to buy Hope's Windows out of Roblin Industries. And when Frank came to me, he said, I've got nothing to put on the table other than my experience in running this business. I said, Frank, we'll find the proper formula for the package that will make it happen. Same with Joe Fairbank. When we did Fairbank Farms, and then it burned to the ground. I remember calling Joe, and Joe was in tears and saying, we'll never rebuild. And I said, why not? We'll rebuild. We'll stand by you. We'll make it happen. And we did. And it was a group of us. I mean, it was, you know, the Paul Sandbergs of the world and the Joe Gerasi's of the world, and ultimately Jack Glenzer, the county executive, and Andy Goodell. All great economic development visionaries that we had to work with, but we fully understood that our job was to elevate and celebrate the private sector person willing to invest his money, her money, in trying to make their business dream a reality. That we weren't creating the jobs, they were creating the jobs.